life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Bern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Bern, you and I are both avid readers, and I know that we read a lot, both fiction and nonfiction, and it's always so interesting to have an idea or a window onto other people's viewpoints. But sometimes we'll read things and we'll question what they're saying. And no matter how brilliant the person is, or no matter what the subject or topic is, I wonder if our viewers have these same kinds of questions when they read something, or they'll read something supposedly self-help or motivational, and they'll try to apply these principles in their lives.
And they get
you get so confused and you get so frustrated, and I'm doing what they say and I'm trying this and I'm trying that, but this guy says to do this and this guy says to do the exact opposite.
Every week I run into literally, in some cases, dozens of people who express that frustration. They say, I'm doing everything they tell me to do and it's not working. What else is there? What's going on? And this is what this show has been about over this last couple of years, is to kind of taking a jaundiced look at the traditional wisdom that's out here, conventional wisdom, and saying, wait a minute, I mean, something has to be a little different, otherwise we'd be getting better, deeper, more worthwhile results than we do as a general rule. I was talking to someone today that was saying that the 80-20 rule is really kind of generous, that really there's a much smaller percentage of people who really succeed. And that's true. But what we're really saying is that 80% of the results come out of 20% of the people, and out of those results, the mass of that comes from 1 or 2%. You know? So then again, we're told things all the time in such a articulate, wise, knowledgeable way that unless we really have a premise off of which to work, unless we've practiced our obtuse or opposite thinking, it's easy to get caught. Because I'll tell you think, well, gee, could that be right? Could that be right? For example, I'm victimized by my own obtuse thinking. In all my reading, I go, whoa, wait a minute, and stop it. Let's hold on here. Is that entirely true? And we had thought about talking about this evening, and I wanted to bring a couple things. Here, this recent Newsweek I read, and these may not be major issues, but to me they're like startling things because maybe somehow they keep us from being as successful, as happy, as fulfilled, as stress-free as we could be, and therefore has to have to be examined. I really hadn't read this book, but a fellow by the name of Frank McCourt. Some of our viewers may have heard of him and read his book, Angela's Ashes, and they say it's probably the best-selling book, one of the profound books written in the last half-century. I mean, this is really speaking well for it. And it's an Irishman who left home as a young man, but looked back on a very unhappy childhood. A lot of abuse, a lot of alcoholism, and this kind of thing in a small town, a lot of poverty, and what have you. And he wrote this book about this experience. And the writer of the article, as they were touring the community, readdressing some of the old issues and what have you, and then finally driving away, asked him that wasn't there some release from the pain in the writing of the book. And if I may here, he said, he didn't answer immediately. And the town, Limerick it's called, was sliding away in the rearview mirror. They were leaving the community. And finally he said there was no sense of release. As long as you have memory, there's no catharsis. Now this is written by a highly intelligent man with a huge experience and a big audience. Okay? And when I read that, I went, oh, wait a minute. Yes, there is. Yes, there is a catharsis. And what we mean by catharsis, I think in this case, is a solution, an appeasement, a way out, some peace that can come, and yes, there is, and it has to be in forgiveness. Well, that's a difficult subject. I know. I've read the books and been to the seminars, and I've heard all kinds of things that don't seem somehow to work. There's a certain flippancy about it oftentimes. Just, oh yeah, I forgive. You know what I mean? And we hear that occasionally. But sometimes things are so onerous that come upon us that some people get stuck pretty bad. Just this past week, there was a lady who had a relative who died years and years ago. And I mean, the anger in her when the subject comes up was ominous. I mean, there was still the tears were there, and the loss of control, and the old hurt and the pain and the anger that came from that. And of course, a lot of responsibility was put on the doctor who wasn't able to save this person's life. And so it was the doctor's fault. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't. I mean, it may have been ignorance or lack of expertise or maybe malpractice. I mean, going so far. But the thing of it is, until that woman forgives that doctor, I mean, she'll never have any peace, never be able to process it. And so the catharsis must be there. He went on to say that objects in the mirror are closer than they seem. And those things not taken care of in the past emerge right in front of us constantly. I mean, I see it every single day. And so, yeah, that has to be worked on. And this has been a subject of one of our previous shows, and it doesn't ever hurt to talk about it. Some of the language of forgiveness in the search of the catharsis is forgive and forget. I mean, we've all heard that, and that's not true. I mean, there's no erasure in the human mind. You had a moment.
Well, I just wanted to mention again for some of our viewers who may be new that so much of this show centers around languaging, since you mentioned that word, and our ability to process information correctly, actually get a handle or a big hold of some of these concepts has to do with languaging. And so I'm really anxious to hear what you have to say next because of that very reason. Yes. How we process.
Yes, tragic, because if we don't have the language, or if we don't extend our vocabulary, or if we don't think in this way, we can very readily, easily become victims of someone else's thought. I mean, yeah, we know that's true. And so unless you can examine it carefully and say, wait a minute, now what's the real truth here, it's easy to get misled. Tragically, it's been said that all of us, the viewers, you and I, are where we are in life because that's where we want to be because of this kind of thinking, and that's not true. I mean, there's a lot of people who aren't where they want to be, but they've been misled, they've been given improper tools. If you're reading the wrong roadmap, or if some authoritative figure guides you in a certain direction and you follow confidently, and it happens to be the wrong direction, that's not entirely your fault. You have the responsibility, but there's a difference there. You know what I mean? There's that fine line. Let's talk about this forgive and forget. I mean, there's no erasure, no evidence of any erasure in the human mind. So once you've had the experience, in all probability, especially if it happened subsequent to 6 years old, that you're never going to erase it. It's always going to be there as part of your consideration process. Now, I mentioned 6 years old. Just recently, I don't know if we've talked about this or not, but just recently I read that some brain research has indicated that there is some erasure of experiences we had between the time we were born until we were 6. There's a restructuring of the brain and the synapses and what have you, and a lot of stuff is eliminated. And gee, when I read that, I realized that it is true that I don't have a lot of recall prior to 6 years old. I mean, there's a lot of things happen I have no recollection of. Isolated moments, you know what I mean, but not a clear memory like I do since.
Now, I wonder about that. Because they say you take people back through hypnosis or by stimulating different centers of the brain with an electrode, that they can recall all these different memories or activities or experiences from a very young age. Is it that they're just not available?
Yeah, there's a re-examination of that. I think that they begin to realize that a lot of those memories are fabricated, and they're created by the new conscious mind to satisfy the needs of the listener or the event, that we have to be careful of that. It's not that there's not a lot of synapses left. I'm saying that we can also create memory that may not be there, and there's been a tragic number of cases where people have recalled incest and what have you, that there's no evidence for whatever, and a lot of pain has come from it. And so we have to be careful. We have to be careful about this. But this forgive and forget is kind of, I call it a lie because it's not the whole truth. I take a liberty with the word lie, I'll admit. I see it as a semantical issue, or therefore a faux pas. And so people say, well, yeah, but just let it go. I know we've heard that a lot, just let it go. And there's a little voice inside says, yeah, but how do you do that, Daddy? You know what I mean? It's one of those kind of things.
Well, in addition to that, Bern, a lot of times there are people or situations in our life that are not in our past, that continue to be part of our present and will go on with us into our future, where we could continue to be angry daily, from moment to moment. So forgetting is not even a possibility in those situations.
Well, particularly if we haven't taken care of the past. My experience has been that if you go back and you really clean up the past, in a way that I'll mention here in a few moments, if you really clean it up and get comfortable with what occurred, it's amazing how comfortable you can be with whatever occurs today. It's kind of like you get good at forgiving in the moment when things are occurring.
And that's my point, because you may be willing to go forward with your life, but other parties may not be willing to. And there may still be those taunts and cries to battle from day to day.
And then we're left with a choice or a decision to either endure that and continue in the process of forgiving, that 70 times 7 that someone mentioned.
And sometimes you may have to, especially if there are children involved, or a work environment or other situations where you have to stay in somewhat close proximity to that other individual or circumstance.
And that's a good time to become objective, which is another issue we'll get to this evening or maybe next week. The fact that we have an incredible capacity to be objective that's unexercised by most people. And they may not even be conscious of their capacity to do so, but wow, when you practice it and you get good at it, you have another dimension of life that can really help in flourishing.
It's another tool in your toolbox, and it's more power that you have in a situation to choose instead of to react.
Exactly. The catharsis in forgiving comes in not just letting go, which is impossible, not in writing off an event as a non-consequential thing. Someone has once said if someone really offends you, one way to forgive them is to imagine them in long john underwear with their rear flap down, and just really humiliate them in your mind. And I don't think that works. It's not enhancing in any way. So there's another way. And it's knowing, understanding that our subconscious mind, which we've said in the past, can't see, hear, feel, smell, or taste. It's an accumulation of experiences. And doesn't know the difference between real and synthetic. Doesn't know the difference. And so the real release comes from in forgiving, using the word, and then reperceiving. Just to forgive doesn't take care of it. I mean, there's too much evidence that I forgive Dad, I forgive Mom, I forgive, period, doesn't necessarily clear up a person's life, because you see that they're still reacting hatefully and painfully in the future. So they didn't take care of it. Okay. However, if you reperceive the experience, and thus have a new experience that's in concert or in parallel with the other one, that softens the issue. For example, if someone said, say they said something to you, and going back and recalling that experience, you can say, I understand now that they were unprepared to do any different, that they were coming from hurt and pain and fear and anxiety. They were trying to save themselves, okay? And so when they did that, it was inappropriate behavior, but it doesn't necessarily mean to demean me and the rest of my life. And so I forgive them, and I love them, and I understand how that can happen. And I forgive myself for reacting to that. At the same time, I have to reperceive. What would they have said? What would they have done if they'd have been able to come from a love posture? In other words, you can actually imagine them doing or saying that. In other words, rather than someone saying you're a jerk, someone actually, you reperceive them as saying, I understand how you might come from that position, but I love you, and I want to honor that, but I'm not able to because my truth says something else. In other words, it was a whole different experience having them said that. See what I'm saying? In other words, it seems like, whoa, you're creating a phony past. Well, would you rather have a valid past and a painful present, or a, reperceived past and a delightful future? And I would opt for the latter every single time. But it's understanding that process. And we could do a whole show just on forgiveness, I'm sure. But the thing is, there is a catharsis. And so here is an ignorant intellect. That's not to demean him in any way.
I have another question for you. Say you were to evaluate this person and ask yourself the question, if they were not so hurt or afraid or defensive or self-protective, how would they have acted if they were to come from a love posture?
Right.
And what if you search your mind and you say, you know what, that person just does not have a love posture.
Oh, you give it to them. You give it to them.
They just really are
Right.
selfish, etc., etc.,
Right.
etc.
Right.
They're vindictive, they're cruel, they're out to hurt people, they're out to cause damage.
However, and you can be sorry. So you can apologize for something that
You
they
can be
do.
sorry for what they could have been.
Sorry for what might have happened in their life to bring them to that place. Because something happened, because that's not a real healthy, natural state. And so when someone is vindictive and hateful and posturing and manipulative, in all probability, they've had some really painful experiences that they're having to deal with. That's part of their consideration process. And so you can be sorry for whatever happened in their life to bring them to that place, and understand that if it hadn't occurred, they might have been able to come from a different place and give them. See, tint and touch someone else's fear with your love and understanding. It's kind of like a photographer can take a picture and show it to you, and you'll not be very pleased. You know, stray hair and a little spot on your tooth and a little zit and whatever, and say, I don't like that picture. And they say, well, wait a minute. So they go back to the lab and they tint and touch it with an airbrush and what have you, and they take out the pimple and remove the hair and bring it back. Say, how do you like this? Say, oh, I like that picture. And it's true. We can do the same thing with the images in our mind, with our conscious mind.
One thing that I've always done, you mentioned that sometimes people are told to imagine their enemy in a state of great humiliation, naked in front of a jurying crowd or whatever. What I've always found that has touched me the most is to imagine that person as a child, as a baby.
Good.
And remember, that was someone's beautiful, innocent little baby. That person came into this world sweet and precious and wonderful. Every person you meet, no matter how horrible they are today, physically, mentally, emotionally, came into this world as a beautiful, precious little baby. And if you can get back in touch with that child, then you can truly mourn for what is.
Right, exactly. And that gives us our capacity to forgive, to understand, to love, and to re-perceive, and clean up that moment so that we can have a better one right now. And it's a constant thing. We talk about agape love and practicing its facets every day, like have a patient day and a kind day and a guileless day and what have you. But every single day should be undergirded with the forgiveness process, to constantly doing it. For example, today, I heard a person's name from someone that I hadn't talked to for 50 years. Yeah. This fellow name was Don White, and he was an old classmate from high school, and he called to advise me of a class reunion that they had last Saturday that I was not able to make, and had mentioned some old classmates. Well, there was an Elizabeth Pennington, and there was a moment that even Elizabeth, I'm sure, would remember, that happened when I was in the second grade. It caused me to draw away from her and to stay clear, on all the time that I knew her in the subsequent 10 years, not having the tools to work with. And matter of fact, that and a couple of other incidents caused me to leave high school, leave town, go into the service, and never call or write or visit. Okay, and now we're reconnecting after a half a century. And it's really interesting. That name came up, and I knew I was okay with Elizabeth now because I had forgiven her about 3 years ago. You know what I mean? In other words, I had gone through that process, hadn't thought about it all those years, and sort of in the process of cleaning up the mind, had that old incident bubble up. See, we don't forget. Time doesn't heal. The process heals. And it's so important to learn the process because it was really fascinating. Just all of a sudden one day there was that, oh my gosh, in the 7th grade, so that was a 61-year-old image that I hadn't thought about in probably 61 years. and yet it was there, and it had to be tended to. And so I forgave and understood and reperceived and loved her, and was able to set that alongside the old memory. And it kind of, you know, I mean, sometimes if you have a glass of dirty water and a glass of real pure water and you put it together, it's not as bad, is it? But if you keep pouring that pure water in there, pretty soon all the muck is gone. And that's what reperception will do. Oh, you remember that it was a dirty glass of water, but it's no longer that way. And I think it's a magnificent gift that if we exercise it, can make a whole new life. And once again, we're back to the fact that he's a fine mind and highly regarded man who won a Pulitzer Prize. You know what I mean? And yet his delivery to the world may be a little bit short. And I'm perfectly open to say that so was mine oftentimes. I'm subject to, you know, examination, and I'm careful what I say. And sometimes I'll watch this show and I'll go, oh, jeez, did I say that? You know what I mean? Yeah, we're all subject to it. But we need to constantly be aware so that we can elevate, enhance, enrich, enliven, edify in every way that we possibly can. And so it's that kind of thing that we run into. And I'd invite our viewer that when you read, to think, to examine, to not accept, to challenge, to resist if necessary, and then eventually to go ahead and compliment, you know what I mean, when it's there.
I think especially when they read or listen to statements that are somehow limiting, that
yes.
clearly put you in a box,
Yeah.
or say you do not have the capacity or the ability to accomplish
Good,
or to
good.
achieve or to create this in your life.
And that's what he just did there.
Yeah.
And so we said, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah, is there a way through? And there usually, and I would think probably always is, a way through. Because, let me see if I can find this other one. There was something else that I read. Oh, this is in concert with it. This fellow is MD, Dr. Charles Whitfield, delightful book on the child within. I mean, good book. And please understand, and I want the viewer to understand, and I just go around picking at people, I'm just careful. You know what I mean? When I see something, I go, whoa, wait a minute. And I noticed here today, I was trying to support some of this in order to, you know, kind of utilize our time effectively. And I read this, that, let's see here, the child within, okay, refers to that part of each of us, which is ultimately alive, good, energetic, good, creative, and fulfilled. It is our real self, who we truly are. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute, I'm not buying that. You know what I mean? It just rings along, you know what I mean? Oh, and it's so easy to hear this stuff and go, oh, it feels so right. And wait a minute, what are we saying here? Some good stuff mingled, okay, with stuff that may not be true. The child within refers to that part of each of us, which is ultimately alive. Good, because, I mean, children
are ultimately alive.
Ultimately alive, you know what I mean?
When you wish they weren't sometimes.
Energetic, good, you know. Creative. I'm not sure. Most of what occurs in our life is collative. In other words, you learn this bit of information and you learn this bit of information and you collate it and you might come up with a new idea or a concept or a perception, but it's not so much creation, you know, as it is collation. In other words, and the more that we can collate, the more creative we appear. You know, the more unique, the more original we can become. But I'm not confident about creative and fulfilled. The child is not fulfilled. A child is an empty vessel that has all this wonderful capacity to absorb unlimited information.
And they're very thirsty to absorb.
Yeah, and
if you've ever sat with a child for an hour,
yeah,
and you know what kind of questions they ask, they're not simple yes and no questions.
Yes.
They're questions that take half an hour to, you don't even know the answers to most of them.
Yeah. And it is our real self, who we truly are. Well, you know what my attitude is about self, the fact that we're not. In other words, self is another one of those semantical faux pas in that it's a singular term, means a single entity. And the more conscious we become that we're trichotomous, or that there's three agendas in each of our minds. Everyone on the planet has three separate, conflictive, oftentimes, agendas. The subconscious mind, which is a survival mechanism, looking out, wanting everything to stay just as it is, kind of satisfied with the status quo. Then the conscious mind, which sees and interprets and wants everything. You know what I mean? That if allowed to flourish will be eternally curious. You know what I mean? Open and aware. And that's not the experience I have out here in the world. I mean, every day I encounter people who don't want to hear. They just don't want to hear it. You know what I mean? So far, so good. Don't bug me. Their subconscious mind is in command. You know what I mean? In other words, the subconscious mind has won the battle and say, hey, everything is okay just the way it is. You're alive. Don't listen to anybody. And that's horrible. That really
And
is
they're
horrible.
not happy.
Oh, no way in the world. Filled with fear, anxiety,
But they're
very
not going to
conscious.
argue with their subconscious about it.
Exactly, exactly. And boy, that battle should go on constantly. That conscious mind of yours should be constantly challenging the subconscious and trying to quiet it and assuage it and allow it for you to move on, to learn more, do more, have more, see more, be more. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's exciting. And so what I'm saying is that some of this stuff is you know, when you're reading, you got to be careful. And if you're not, you could become a victim. Now, I'm not saying this was this man's intention, but another ignorant intellect, just as we are. Every day I celebrate my ignorance. I mean, there's so much I don't know, but yet there's so much that I've concluded, and I know from all my experience that this is more powerful, more edifying, more reinforcing, supportive. You know what I mean? And that's what this is all about. Gina, I mean, we rushed through this half hour. You couldn't even believe. And there's more of this stuff.
Great. I'm looking forward to it.
So we're going to challenge it, and we don't want to step on anybody's toes or hurt anybody's heart, but think. What a gift.
We'd certainly invite our viewers to call in if they have questions
Please,
or
yeah.
challenges they want to voice to us regarding this show.
Yeah, this is Life Talk. And they can call, I think I'll get another pen here, they can call 1-800-661-3490, or if they're in the 916 area, they can call 366-8749. 366-8749, and we'll send them a TV flyer on all the times that we're on every week, and answer any questions they might have. Meanwhile, my name is Bern
Moses.
and you're Gina Fitt.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Gina.